Picture a private estate so vast it has its own postal code. A family that attends no galas, gives no interviews, and appears on no magazine covers, yet controls one of the most recognized brands on the planet. A name that appears on 0 storefronts, 0 product labels, and 0 advertisements, yet collects billions of euros in dividends every single year, like clockwork, while the world sleeps. Most people think BMW is a German car company. They see the logo, the machines, the showrooms in every major city on Earth. They are looking at the surface. Beneath the badge, beneath the engineering, the marketing, the global prestige, sits a family dynasty so deliberately invisible that most BMW owners have never once heard their name. A bloodline that has accumulated and protected its fortune across 4 generations, surviving war, scandal, and the total collapse of an empire that once stretched across the entire European continent. This is not the story of BMW. This is the story of the family that owns it and what it truly means to hold that kind of power. We are going to be tracking one of the most deliberately hidden fortunes in the history of European capitalism. We are going to uncover how a single German family, operating almost entirely in the shadows, turned a collapsing motorcycle manufacturer into a $70 billion automotive empire, survived one of the darkest chapters in modern history, and built a wealth machine so perfectly constructed that it generates billions in passive income every single year without a single family member ever having to set foot in a boardroom. Wait until you hear about the wartime secret that nearly erased this dynasty from history entirely, and how, instead of destroying them, it quietly made them richer. And by the end of this video, you will understand why the Quandt family is not just the power behind BMW. They are a masterclass in how true generational wealth is built, protected, and passed forward across a century of chaos. The name is Quandt, and once you know what they did and what was done in their name, you will never look at a BMW the same way again. To understand the Quandt dynasty, you have to go back to a small textile town in northeastern Germany in the year 1883. That is where a man named Emil Quandt built the foundation of what would become one of the most powerful family fortunes in European history. Emil ran a modest textile manufacturing business in Pritzwalk, a quiet provincial town that most people outside Germany have never heard of. Nothing about his circumstances suggested that his descendants would one day control a global automotive empire worth tens of billions of dollars. But Emil had a son, and that son changed everything. Günther Quandt was born in 1881, and from an early age, it was clear he was operating on a different frequency than the people around him. He took over the family textile business in 1908 after his father's death, and within just a few years, he had transformed it from a regional operation into a thriving industrial enterprise. He had an almost preternatural instinct for leverage, for seeing exactly when to buy, when to expand, and when the world was about to shift beneath everyone's feet. Then came World War I, and while most businessmen saw catastrophe, Günther Quandt saw opportunity. He secured military contracts to supply the German army with uniforms and textile goods, and by the time the war ended in 1918, he had amassed a fortune significant enough to begin acquiring industrial assets at scale. Germany was in ruins. Factories were selling for fractions of their value, and Günther Quandt was buying. Through the 1920s, he expanded aggressively, moving from textiles into batteries, chemicals, and munitions manufacturing. He acquired AFA, the Akkumulatoren Fabrik AG, a battery company that would later become Warta, a name that still sits on store shelves across Europe today. He was building a conglomerate before the word even existed in the business vocabulary of his era. By 1929, Günther Quandt was one of the wealthiest industrialists in Germany. He had not yet touched the automobile industry. That chapter was still coming, but the machine he had built, the financial architecture, the industrial network, the appetite for acquisition, was already in place. The dynasty was loaded. It just needed a trigger. The trigger came in the form of a bankrupt motorcycle company and a son with ice in his veins. Günther Quandt died in 1954, leaving behind an industrial empire and 2 sons from his second marriage, Herbert and Harold Quandt. Harold would later survive a plane crash that killed 70 people in 1961, walking away scarred but alive, as if the universe itself had decided his story wasn't finished yet. But it was Herbert Quandt who would make the move that transformed the family from wealthy German industrialists into a global dynasty. And it almost didn't happen. By the late 1950s, Bayerische Motorenwerke, BMW, was in freefall. The company had been devastated by World War II. Its Munich factories bombed to rubble. Its assets in Eastern Germany seized by Soviet forces. In the post-war years, BMW lurched from crisis to crisis, producing everything from pots and pans to bubble cars in a desperate attempt to stay solvent. By 1959, the situation had become terminal. The company was effectively bankrupt, and Daimler-Benz was circling, preparing to absorb what remained of BMW into its own operation. The shareholders were ready to vote yes. The board was ready to surrender. Herbert Quandt was not. In one of the most consequential corporate decisions in automotive history, Herbert made the unilateral choice to personally bail out BMW. He injected approximately 30 million Deutsche Marks of his own capital into the company, a staggering sum at the time, and blocked the Daimler takeover. He then brought in new management, greenlit the development of a new vehicle line, and bet the entire weight of the Quandt fortune on BMW's survival. That paid off in a way that defies easy description. The BMW 1500, launched in 1962, was the car that saved the company. Elegant, affordable, and precisely engineered, it created an entirely new market segment, the premium midsize sedan, and gave BMW an identity it has never relinquished. Sales exploded, profits followed, and the Quandt family's stake in BMW, which Herbert had fought so hard to protect, began compounding in value at a rate that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Through the 1960s and 1970s, BMW expanded relentlessly. New models, new markets, new manufacturing plants. By 1972, the year the Munich Olympics brought the world's attention to Bavaria, BMW was already a global brand with a reputation for precision engineering that rivaled anything coming out of Stuttgart or Wolfsburg. Herbert Quandt died in 1982, but not before watching his bold, solitary decision transform a dying relic into one of the most profitable automobile manufacturers on Earth. He never sold a single share. Neither did his children. And that discipline, that almost monastic refusal to liquidate, is precisely why the Quandt family today sits atop a fortune that makes most billionaires look like they're still figuring out the basics. Let's talk about what the Quandt family actually owns today, because the numbers are not just impressive. They are staggering in a way that reframes everything you thought you knew about private wealth. The Quandt family collectively holds approximately 46% of BMW AG, split primarily between Stefan Quandt, who owns roughly 29%, and his sister Suzanne Clatton, who holds approximately 21% through her own holding structures. That stake alone, based on BMW's current market capitalization of approximately $70 billion, makes their combined BMW holdings worth somewhere in the region of $30 billion. Let that land for a moment. $30 billion. Just from one company. Just from the shares Herbert Quandt refused to sell in 1959 when everyone else was ready to walk away. But BMW is only the most visible piece of the machine. Every year, BMW AG pays out dividends to its shareholders. In 2022 alone, the company distributed approximately 5.7 billion euros in dividends. The Quandt family's share of that payout, just for holding stock, just for existing as shareholders, was estimated at well over 2 billion euros in a single year, without building a single car, hiring a single engineer, or making a single executive decision. That is the architecture of generational wealth in its purest form. Beyond BMW, Suzanne Clatton, who Forbes consistently ranks as the wealthiest woman in Germany, and one of the top 30 wealthiest people in the world, controls Altana AG, a specialty chemicals company with operations in over 100 countries and annual revenues exceeding 2.8 billion euros. She acquired full control of Altana in 2007, spinning off its pharmaceutical division and refocusing the company into a high-margin industrial chemicals powerhouse. It is not a household name. That is entirely by design. Stefan Quandt, meanwhile, holds significant stakes in Delton AG, the family's primary holding company, in which has investments spanning logistics, technology, and healthcare. He also controls a substantial position in Entrust Datacard, a global security technology firm. A reminder that the Quandt appetite for strategic, non-glamorous, highly profitable industrial assets has never dulled across the generations. Taken together, BMW dividends, Altana revenues, Delton Holdings, and an array of private investments. The combined Quandt family fortune is estimated by most financial analysts at somewhere between $35 billion and $45 billion, depending on market conditions and the valuations applied to their private holdings. To put that in perspective, that is larger than the GDP of Iceland, Honduras, and Cameroon combined, and almost none of it is visible to the naked eye. You won't find a Quandt tower dominating a city skyline. You won't find their name on a stadium, a university building, or a philanthropic foundation with a giant press office. The Quandt empire is designed to be felt, not seen. A financial apparatus so deeply embedded in the global economy that it operates with the quiet permanence of gravity. Every time you see a BMW on the road, every 3 Series, every X5, every M4 thundering down a highway, a fraction of that machine's value flows back, invisibly and inevitably, to a family most people have never heard of. Now let's zoom in. Because behind the holding companies, the dividend statements, and the carefully constructed corporate architecture, there are actual human beings living lives of almost incomprehensible privilege. And yet, paradoxically, the Quandt lifestyle is defined not by extravagance, but by deliberate restraint. This is a family that could outspend almost any name you associate with billionaire excess. And they choose, almost pathologically, not to. No reality television, no tabloid feuds, no Instagram accounts with yacht photographs. The Quandts have weaponized discretion so effectively that their privacy itself has become a kind of power. But make no mistake, the assets are there. Suzanne Clatton, estimated by Forbes in 2023 to be worth approximately $24 billion, maintains a primary residence in Munich, in one of the city's most exclusive residential districts. She is known to own multiple properties across Germany and maintains a lifestyle supported by a personal staff and security apparatus befitting someone who receives death threats with uncomfortable regularity. In 2008, she was targeted in an elaborate blackmail scheme by a man named Helge Skarby, a Swiss con artist who extracted approximately 1.9 million euros from her before she went to German authorities. The scandal was a rare crack in the family's carefully maintained invisibility, and it revealed just how aggressively the Quandts guard their personal lives once that veil was lifted. Stefan Quandt, worth an estimated $17 billion, is similarly private. He maintains a sprawling estate in Bad Homburg, a wealthy spa town north of Frankfurt with a history of housing German industrial aristocracy. He is known for his passion for historic aircraft. He is a licensed pilot and owns a collection of vintage planes that would make most aviation museums envious. He has also invested personally in electric aviation technology, suggesting that the Quandt instinct for positioning ahead of industrial transitions is very much alive in the current generation. The family's connection to automobiles runs deeper than mere ownership. Multiple members of the Quandt family are known enthusiasts who maintain private collections of rare and historic BMW models, vehicles that, in some cases, are not available for purchase at any price because they simply do not exist outside of factory archives and family vaults. As shareholders in one of the world's great luxury automotive brands, they also enjoy access to BMW's most exclusive vehicles before they reach the public. Prototype models, one-off commissions, and engineering studies that never see a showroom floor. And then there is the art. The Quandt family is known within German cultural circles as serious, sophisticated collectors, acquiring works not for public display or social signaling, but for private enjoyment and long-term value preservation. The estimated value of their combined art holdings runs into the hundreds of millions of euros, though precise figures are, characteristically, unavailable. This is a family that has everything, and shows almost none of it, which, when you understand the full arc of their history, makes complete and terrifying sense. Every great dynasty has a shadow, and the Quandt family's shadow is long, dark, and stretches all the way back to the deadliest chapter in human history. For decades, the full extent of the Quandt family's activities during the Third Reich was a subject carefully avoided in German public discourse. The family was wealthy, powerful, and deeply embedded in the fabric of post-war German capitalism. Asking uncomfortable questions about how that wealth was originally consolidated was, for a long time, simply not done. Then, in 2007, a documentary changed everything. A German film titled The Silence of the Quandts, produced by Eric Friedler and broadcast on ARD, Germany's primary public television network, laid out in meticulous, devastating detail exactly what the Quandt industrial empire had done between 1933 and 1945. The findings were not ambiguous. Günther Quandt, the patriarch, the architect of the dynasty, had been a direct beneficiary of the Nazi regime's economic machinery. His battery company, AFA, had used forced labor from concentration camps to fuel wartime production. Thousands of prisoners, many of them Jewish deportees, had worked in Quandt-owned factories under conditions that were, by any legal or moral standard, slavery. The factories produced batteries for German U-boats and munitions for the Wehrmacht. The profits flowed directly into the Quandt fortune. Günther Quandt himself had joined the Nazi Party in 1933, and while he was later classified by a post-war denazification tribunal as merely a fellow traveler rather than an active ideological participant, The documentary made clear that the distinction was largely academic. He had known. He had benefited. And in the chaos of post-war reconstruction, he had simply continued building his empire while the full truth remained buried. For over 60 years, the family said nothing. After the documentary aired and ignited a national conversation in Germany, Susanne Klatten and Stefan Quandt released a joint statement acknowledging the findings and commissioning an independent historical study to fully document the family's wartime activities. That study, completed by historian Joachim Schultisek in 2011, confirmed and expanded upon the documentary's conclusions. And the family accepted its findings publicly, calling the history shameful. It was a rare moment of accountability from a family that almost never speaks. But the controversy did something else. It revealed the invisible architecture of protection that had surrounded the Quandts for generations. Political connections, media relationships, the quiet influence that comes from being one of the largest private shareholders in one of Germany's most strategically important companies. BMW is not just a car brand in Germany. It is a national industrial asset, a major employer, a symbol of German engineering excellence on the world stage. The German government does not interfere with BMW, and the Quandt family, as its controlling shareholders, enjoys a layer of institutional protection that goes far beyond what any security detail could provide. This is how true dynastic power works. It is not enforced by armies or expressed through politics directly. It is structural. It is embedded. It is the kind of power that survives wars, scandals, and decades of scrutiny, and comes out the other side largely intact. The Quandts did not just survive the 20th century. They compounded through it. So where does a dynasty like this go from here? Stefan Quandt is in his mid-50s. Susanne Klatten is in her early 60s. Both are healthy, active, and by all observable measures, deeply engaged in protecting and expanding the family's holdings. But the question of succession, of how you transfer a fortune of this magnitude, with this much history embedded in it, to the next generation, is one that the Quandts have clearly been engineering for years. Stefan has children. Susanne has 3 children from her marriage to Jan Klatten, a fellow heir to a significant German industrial fortune. The next generation of Quandts is being raised in the same tradition of deliberate privacy, elite European education, and total insulation from the kind of public exposure that erodes so many great family fortunes from the outside in. The family's wealth is structured through a web of holding companies, trusts, and investment vehicles specifically designed to prevent the dilution that destroys dynastic wealth across generations. There will be no dramatic public breakup of the BMW stake, no hostile siblings selling shares to fund lavish lifestyles. The architecture Herbert Quandt built, and that his children have maintained with almost religious discipline, is constructed to last. On the philanthropic front, Susanne Klatten has become increasingly visible in recent years through her support of German scientific research and innovation. She funds programs focused on renewable energy, materials science, and advanced manufacturing, areas that, not coincidentally, align precisely with the future direction of the automotive and chemicals industries her family controls. This is philanthropy as strategy, deployed with the same precision the family applies to everything else. BMW itself is in the middle of one of the most consequential transitions in its history. The shift to electric vehicles. The company has committed billions to its Neue Klasse electric platform, set to launch in 2025. And the Quandt family's long-term bet on the brand means their fortune is now directly tied to whether BMW can navigate the EV revolution as successfully as it navigated every industrial transition before it. Given the family's track record across 4 generations and a full century of economic upheaval, 2 world wars, a currency collapse, the Cold War, the digital revolution, it would be unwise to bet against them. The Quandt dynasty is not a story about cars. It is a story about patience, about the compounding power of never selling, never showing off, and never, not once, losing sight of the long game. It is a story about how real generational wealth is not built in a single brilliant moment, but in thousands of quiet, disciplined decisions made across decades by people whose names you were never supposed to know. And perhaps that is the most powerful lesson of all. The families you've never heard of are often the ones who own everything. The badge on the front of a BMW has always stood for something: precision, performance, the particular arrogance of a machine that knows exactly what it is. But now you know what it really stands for. It stands for a century of calculated survival. For a family that turned textile mills into munitions factories into industrial empires, and industrial empires into one of the most valuable automotive dynasties on the planet. A family that absorbed scandal, weathered wars, and emerged from every crisis, not just intact. but richer. The next time you see that blue and white roundel on a showroom floor, on the highway, in a magazine, ask yourself a simple question. Who actually wins when the world buys into a dream? Because while millions of people around the world save for years to put that badge on their driveway, the Quandt family is collecting billions in dividends, quietly, invisibly, from an estate in Bad Homburg and a residence in Munich, leaving no trace, making no noise, and building a fortune that will still be growing long after every car on the road today has turned to dust. That is the real engine behind BMW, and it has never once needed a key to start.